Hey gaming fans, so today is another discussion video. We're going to be talking about draw cards, specifically in the GOAT format, as that's the format I've really just been into lately. So I just thought I would talk about it because it's interesting, from the limited card pool we have, the different kinds of draw spells we have and traps and all that other thing, just different ways to draw cards and which ones to ultimately use in a deck and which ones to kind of never use or maybe sometimes use. So obviously we have some popular choices here. Of course, Pot of Greed is the number one card. I mean, there's absolutely no drawbacks to playing this card. The only drawback I could ever think of is if you're facing against a deck out deck, like Empty Jar, and you probably don't want to draw cards. But, other than that, this card obviously is going to be played in almost, well, pretty much every deck. There wouldn't be any reason to. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything. You draw two cards. That's the end of the effect. And, there's a reason why this card has been banned in regular, modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just too powerful. That just the ability to just draw two cards, no drawback. But also at the same time, we have Graceful Charity, and I've often had discussions about which one's a better card. I mean, obviously, if you could run both, you do run both. But is it better to just draw two cards, or is it better to dig one card deeper and then pitch a couple of cards, which could further a strategy? So, but then most of the time you're not arguing against these cards. Because these cards are pretty much staples in GOAT format anyways. But then you get into some other cards like Card Destruction. And, this one doesn't actually give you card advantage because you actually play Card Destruction and then you discard the cards in your hand and then draw the same number of cards you discarded. So you're actually getting a minus off of this card. But it is drawing some cards and it is getting you somewhat closer to a strategy, and much like to like your strategy cards or whatever you need. And much like with Graceful Charity, it does fuel your graveyard for cards like if you're playing with chaos monsters or something. However, the drawback is it's also allowing your opponent to draw cards and fill their graveyard. So you might not always want to play a card like this, even though it's going to get you to possibly your strategy. Maybe if you're playing a deck like Cyberstein or an OTK style deck, that's good. You probably wouldn't play this if you're trying to get Exodia, unless you have backup soldiers or something like that, because you don't want to discard Exodia pieces, but you know what I'm saying. So those are pretty much your common draw spells right there. But there's also other ones like Upstart Goblin, which is a very simple draw one card. It just replaces itself, gets you one card deeper into the deck, but your opponent gets 1,000 life points. Now, in GOAT format, that could be problematic because GOAT format tends to be a longer, play type of environment, and you're really whittling away at your opponent's life points. So giving them 1,000 might not be a good idea. It might actually be kind of counterproductive, depending on the kind of deck you're playing. Obviously, if you're playing Burn, you're not going to play Upstart Goblin because you're trying to burn your opponent. You're not trying to give them 1,000 life points. Bearing you're playing some kind of other kind of burn like, bad reaction decks. But other than that, this card you probably would avoid. However, for combo specific decks, such as Exodia, such as Deck Out, you don't care about your opponent's life points, so you're naturally going to use something like Upstart Goblin. And this is limited to 2 in GOAT format, and there's a reason for that. I mean, it does further things like Exodia, so you don't want to have overpowering combo decks. We also have a similar card, which is Jar of Greed. Now, this doesn't give your opponent any life points. It's a 1-for-1 trade-off. However, it does take a turn to go off, so you do have to set it. It is a trap. Now, one of the good things about Jar of Greed, I should say, is that you can set it as bait, and if you hope your opponent plays like an MST on it, thereby they're losing a card and you're gaining a card. So that's actually pretty good. But it is kind of annoying, though, when you're top decking and you're hoping to get that card that's going to win you the game, and this guy comes up. You're going to be stuck with this in your hand, and then you're going to have to set it. And, of course, your opponent can chain to it, or not chain to it, but end turn, destroy it, and then you're not going to get your card. So I mean, there is drawbacks to it, but again, combo-centric decks, you might want to run it. You know, it's if you have a space in your deck, why not? Then there's cards like Reckless Greed, which, much like Pot of Greed, gets you 2 cards for the price of 1, but the same drawbacks as Jar of Greed, where you have to set it and use it on your opponent's turn, and then a secondary drawback, where you don't get to draw for 2 more turns. Ideally, this card was used in other decks outside of GOAT format in 3, so you'd play 3 Reckless Greeds, and hope you can actually set 2 and activate 2 on a single turn, or 3 if you got really lucky, and then you still only miss 2 turns, but you draw about 4 to 6 cards. So it can actually pay for itself in the long run, and you'll probably, with a handful of cards like that, you might just win anyways. But in GOAT format, I don't know if that's going to be the case. If you are, last ditch effort, maybe you do need those last 2 cards to finish off your opponent, but I think that's too heavy of a drawback to miss 2 more turns of drawing based on, what you're going to get and what you're going to draw. There was another one also that's Good Goblin Housekeeping. Again, better run in 3s than it is in this format, where you're only allowed 2. I mean, with Reckless Greed, they said you're only allowed 1 in this format, in the GOAT format. With Good Goblin, they allow 2, just to prevent you from abusing the card, I guess. But this one does, it's the first time you activate it, you're activating a card, then you're drawing a card, and then you're discarding a card, which is actually a -1 on your hand. So, but you do get to draw an additional card for each Good Goblin Housekeeping in your graveyard. So in decks where you want to discard, this could come in handy. Actually, sorry, you're not discarding it. You're putting it at the bottom of your deck. So that's even worse. So you're not even getting the discard. You're just shuffling a card from your hand back into your deck. So that's even worse. That might only work for a strategy where a certain card has to be special summoned from the deck. And there's not lots of those around. So this one's definitely not the greatest that you're going to want to play. If you're just searching for just cards to draw cards, you might end up playing it. Maybe in Exodia, maybe. But I don't know. I think because of the restriction of you're only allowed 2, it's probably not a good idea. So that's it for just the straight out draw. Now, of course, you could also play other types of cards that are not really draw cards. You could play things like Reinforcement of the Army, Terraforming, Last Will. All these cards will get you a card, but you always have to do some kind of, you're either going to be just pulling a monster, which you might not need, or a field spell. They're very, very specific about what they're going to do, but they do get you to what you need at some point. Then we got other types of cards that do draw cards, but do take a little bit of time, effort, or whatever, and they can be stopped, such as Morphing Jar, Cyber Jar. Another popular one that a lot of people like to play is Dekochi. So obviously these are all different kinds of effects. Morphing Jar is straight simple, much like your card destruction, only this one gives you 5 cards, but it also gives your opponent 5 cards. So that might not be a good strategy if you don't want your opponent drawing cards. You'd have to have Protector of the Sanctuary face up on the field, and then flip this card, then you'll get your advantage out of it. And if you're not familiar with Protector of the Sanctuary, it basically says your opponent cannot draw cards outside of the draw phase. And then Cyber Jar is not really a draw card, but it does give you the ability to put cards into your hand, because it does destroy all the monsters on the field. Then you reveal 5 cards, and you summon level 4 monsters to the field, and then the rest go to your hand. So it can be a draw card. And then there's Dekochi, which is your very basic draw. Just draw 1 card, but he has to be flipped face up, much like his weaker counterpart, Dark Mimic level 1. Both of them being flip effects, which does put you in the realm of this little guy, Nobleman of Crossout, which a lot of people do play in GOAT format, and you're allowed to in your deck. So whether someone's playing it in their main deck or they're side decking it, so having this kind of strategy can also, it can backfire on you, especially if you're playing 3 of each card. Nobleman will wipe all of them out. However, it will also wipe out your opponent's cards as well if they are also playing these. So, it could work. But, I think on average, playing something like Dekochi, especially on turn 1, you get to set it and then hope your opponent attacks or doesn't attack. You get to flip it up, you get a card, and you get a 1400 beat stick. There's also some fun tricks you could do with Book of Moon or Tsukuyomi and flip it back down and then draw another card. So that's, I think Dekochi is probably one of the more versatile ones. It is a machine, it's dark, there could be some advantages to that as well. And of course we have other cards like Dark Mimic level 3, which can be special summoned from Dark Mimic level 1, but it has to survive. So you would have to use cards kind of like, level limit area B or some kind of messenger piece or something to try and keep it on the field. But Dark Mimic level 3, at least it's got 1000 attack. It's a fiend. You might actually want to attack with this. You could pull it out with from cards like Mystic Tomato. So, it does have its advantages, and all it has to do is just be destroyed as a result of battle, and you get your card. So, it could work too. You can actually call it haunted in response to an attack, and then your opponent attacks it, you get a card. So there is an advantage to kind of playing Dark Mimic level 3. Also, if you play Chaos, you get a Dark in the graveyard. And then we have some that are just plain hard to pull off, which is like Death's Lakota. Again, you need to have something like level limit area B, or Messenger Piece, or Threatening Roar, or something, because this card needs to survive a whole turn face down, which, Nobleman of Crossout can come after it. And then on your turn, you have to flip it, you draw your card, and then you flip it back again. Common strategy is the flip-flop / Pac-Man deck that will use this and actually draw cards every turn, as long as you're stalling and your opponent cannot attack it. So this one's actually a pretty viable one based on the strategy. I would never play this in something like Chaos or anything where you're trying to be really aggressive, because chances are you're going to set it and it's going to get destroyed. So it's not always the best case. And then you got a card like Magical Merchant, which doesn't technically draw a card. It excavates the top card of your deck, and then you add that card, spell card. If it's a spell or a trap card, you add it to your hand, and then you send the rest to the graveyard. So you just keep excavating until you hit a spell or a trap. So it's going to draw you a spell or a trap. It's going to send stuff to the graveyard, but it does fall prey to the same victim, same thing that Dekochi does, and all the other ones where you do have to set it, and you could get Nobleman. A lot of people are playing it though because it is light, it draws you a card, and it's good for Chaos. So I think it's a pretty good option as well. And also combo decks, if you're looking for a specific spell, like Final Countdown or something, really good card. Then we also have Aeronite Parseth. I think that's how you say it, Parseth. He's a classic monster as well, 1900 beat stick. He's got piercing, so you can attack. So if you attack their, say, Dekochi or something, you could draw a card after he does his damage. Or if your opponent doesn't have a monster, you still attack your opponent and you get to draw a card. Also a light monster, good for the Chaos deck, so you typically do see this guy in a lot of decks. He's kind of like Dekochi and Aeronite. They kind of go together, and they build up your little draw package. So let's move on to some other different kinds of sort of draw cards, but actually requires a little bit of effort. So we have like Sacred Crane. This is a good one. I've seen strategies, I've seen decks built based on this guy alone. Also, not just in GOAT format, but in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you throw this guy into the graveyard and then you just special summon him, or you play cards like Marauding Captain to special summon him. As long as he's special summoned, you get to draw a card. So Marauding Captain, for instance, you normal summon Marauding Captain, and then you normal summon this guy. I believe Marauding Captain's any monster. I'm trying to remember now. It's been a while since I've looked at that card. I'm pretty sure that works, where you get to normal summon him, or sorry, special summon him, draw a card. But you also got Foolish Burial, or not Foolish Burial, Premature Burial, Call It a Haunted, the Creator. There's so many different ways you could special summon this guy from the graveyard, or from your hand. So, I mean, you've got to put some work into it. You almost have to build a deck to run him, but still pretty cool card. And he's got a 1600, attack, and he's a wing beast for whatever reason. Then we got Royal Magical Library. Excuse me. That's also a, you got to put a little bit of work into. It's seen in like Exodia decks and stuff where you play a lot of spells, especially drawing spells. So every time you put activate 3 spells, or your opponent activates a spell, you get 3 counters on this guy. You get to remove them all and draw 1 card. He's pretty good because he does have a 2,000 defense, which will stand up towards a lot of monsters that will basically try to attack it. But he's got 0 attack, so turn 1, if you want to play him, you better have something that's going to back him up, like a Threatening Roar, or any of the cards I was mentioning, like Messenger of Peace or something. Something that will kind of keep him on the field. And then we have some others that do require other kinds of strategies, like Super Rejuvenation. This one, obviously, you're only going to play it in a dragon deck. And you have to wait till your end phase. So during your end phase, this card is activated. You draw a number of cards equal to the number of discarded or tributed dragons. So pretty much in a dragon deck only. I've seen strategies using this with Exodia, for instance, where it was like a dragon draw Exodia thing. Pretty good. Just in a standard dragon deck, you might want to, definitely if you're tributing monsters a lot and discarding them, that one could work. This is another one that's similar to, again, found its way in a few Exodia builds. Heart of the Underdog does allow you to draw. This is an interesting card if you're playing a lot of normal monsters. So essentially during your draw phase, you draw a normal monster, reveal it, then you draw 1 more card. And if that 1 more card is also a normal monster, you get to draw again and continue on until you stop drawing a normal monster. I mean, the downside is you're playing normal monsters. You got no effects. I currently have a deck that used this card, not in GOAT format though. It was using the normal pendulum monsters, and it would actually, if you got this card out and you waited till your next turn, you could actually draw a significant amount of cards. And the last of the draw things I wanted to kind of show was Card of Safe Return. This is a card that's been banned in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! For a very long time because it easily gets abused. Really good in zombie decks because zombies, they do a lot of special summoning. So, from the graveyard, I should say. But this is basically every time a monster is special summoned from your graveyard, you get to draw 1 card. So, you can play like anything that revives itself, like Manticore of Darkness was a good strategy with this. Where if you get like a Manticore of Darkness and you discard it, and if you had another Manticore of Darkness, and you could create some kind of loop. But there was also, just any kind of strategies like, well, even just a basic Call of the Haunted is going to get you a card off of this. I do play this in a zombie build that I have right now, because I do play Book of Life, I play Premature Burial, I play Call of the Haunted. So a lot of the zombie stuff that they do recur from the graveyard, you're going to want to play that. And again, you have to work the deck around it, but really good card and can really draw you some cards. And now to kind of end this kind of long video, there's also the opposite end of it where you're pretty much stopping your opponent from drawing cards. And so you can do that as well. In the process of trying to draw cards, you can also change things around to prevent your opponent from drawing cards. Kind of the anti-draw cards. So you got Time Seal, which essentially just forces your opponent to not draw a card next turn, which could work. I mean, if you're playing a discard deck or any kind of deck where you're trying to slow your opponent down, them not being able to draw a card can be pretty significant. Again, this card is banned in regular tournaments, in regular formats, but in GOAT format, it's legal still. Drop Off was another powerful one. I remember when this card first came out, it really annoyed the crap out of me because you draw your card and you get excited about what you just drew and your opponent says no. Basically, you just discard that card. So, kind of annoying. There's also one in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! That was created called Drastic Drop Off, where it's a counter trap and it works when you draw a card at any point. But that's not in the GOAT format. And then we also have this guy, kind of like a Yatagarasu, Fenrir. When he attacks your opponent, you basically, when he destroys a monster and sends it to the graveyard, your opponent doesn't draw a card next turn, or they skip their draw phase. So much like Time Seal, But the downsides to this, obviously, is you got to banish 2 a water monster to special summon him, and he's only 1400 attack, so you're going to have to boost up his attack. But anyways, yeah, I just wanted to have that kind of discussion about what I thought were good and bad cards. There's obvious choices in here. Again, like I said, Pot of Greed, you're all going to want to play it. Graceful Charity, and, you know, based on your deck, you might want to even play Upstart Goblin. There's just so many options, and this is what makes it difficult to decide what's going to, you know, earn a spot in your deck. Or are you just not even going to bother trying to add a lot of these draw cards and just add the cards that make your deck powerful and, you know, skip the whole trying to draw into, trying to make your deck thinner. And another, I guess, caveat too is this is all based on whether you're playing a 40 card deck. You're not going to play Upstart Goblin in a 41 card deck. It just makes no sense unless you just want your opponent to gain life. Otherwise, don't do it. Anyways, let me know what you think. I always like to hear your comments. Throw some comments down below. What are your favorite draw cards? What cards do you consider to be staples for the deck? Which ones do you avoid? Just throw it down there in the comments. Always fun to talk. It's a discussion video after all. Anyways, hope you liked the video. Hope you subscribe. Talk to you later.